What if the most dangerous part of a missile strike was not the explosion, but the story told after it? Because in the hours after Iran fired at America's most important base in the Gulf, two battles began at once, one in the sky and one in your head. And before we go deeper, do this with me. If you like breakdowns that cut through noise, tap like, subscribe, and share this with the one friend who always asks, what actually happened? For days, a dramatic version of this story spread fast. It claimed Iran buried America's war brain under 557 missiles. It claimed the United States went dark. It claimed a final command was sent out just seconds before total silence. It sounded huge. It sounded cinematic. It sounded like the kind of military story people remember for years. But when you strip away the drama and line up the verified reporting, a very different picture appears. And honestly, that real picture may be more important than the fantasy. Because the true story is not about a superweapon attack that shattered American command in the Middle East. The true story is about how modern war works when both sides are trying to hurt each other without crossing the last line. It is about signal, restraint, propaganda, and survival. It is about why a strike can look massive, feel historic, and still be designed not to trigger full collapse. And it is about why one damaged dome in the desert mattered far beyond the hole it left behind. So let's slow this down and rebuild the moment carefully. The place at the center of this story is Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. This base is not just another airstrip with a few planes parked in the heat. It is one of the most important military hubs the United States has in the region. Associated Press described it as a major regional military hub and the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command. It has hosted thousands of American service members and has long played a major role in operations across the Middle East. Qatar has spent about $8 billion developing it over 2 decades. Source: that alone explains why the base matters. But it also explains why stories about it become larger than life almost instantly. When something happens at Al Udeid, people do not just hear a base was hit. They hear the nerve center was hit. They hear the command system was tested. They hear America's military reach may be vulnerable. That kind of symbolism is powerful. And Iran understood that. In June 2025, after the United States bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran, Tehran needed to answer. Not answering would look weak at home. Answering too hard could invite a much bigger American response. So Iran had a narrow path to walk. It had to retaliate, but in a way that showed force without losing control of the ladder of escalation. That is the tension at the heart of this event. Not total war, calibrated war, not a random outburst. A message wrapped in a missile strike. According to Axios, Iran launched multiple missiles at Al Udeid in retaliation for the US strikes, and sources said both Qatar and the Trump administration were aware of the attack ahead of time. President Trump later called it a very weak response and thanked Iran for giving early notice. Axios reported that a source familiar with the matter said 14 Iranian missiles were intercepted by Qatari air defenses, while one missile struck a building near the base, causing no casualties and no damage to military infrastructure. Source: Associated Press added more detail. A Qatari military officer said one of 19 missiles fired by Iran was not intercepted and hit the base, but no American or Qatari personnel were harmed. AP later reported that satellite imagery showed damage to a geodesic dome housing equipment used for secure communications, while the rest of the base appeared largely untouched. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell acknowledged that an Iranian ballistic missile hit the dome and said the strike caused minimal damage to equipment and structures. He also said the base remained fully operational and capable of conducting its mission. Source: So right away, the giant viral claim runs into a wall. Not 557 verified missiles, not a confirmed collapse of the underground command center, not proof that America lost control of active regional operations, not evidence that the base stopped functioning. Instead, the best verified reporting points to a limited Iranian strike, advance warning, successful interceptions, no casualties, damage to a communications dome, and a base that stayed operational. Now, pause there, because it would be easy to stop and say, so the viral version was fake, end of story. But that would miss the bigger point. The reason this event matters is not that the wildest version was unsupported. The reason it matters is that even a limited strike on Al Udeid carried serious meaning. Even when damage is restrained, symbolism can be enormous. Even when a war does not widen, both sides are still writing messages in fire. That is what makes this worth understanding. Think about the logic from Iran's side. If Tehran fired nothing, it would look helpless after US strikes on its nuclear facilities. That could weaken deterrence. It could weaken the regime's image at home. It could tell rivals that Iran absorbs major blows and does little in return. If Tehran fired too much, killed Americans, or destroyed critical US infrastructure, it could trigger a much broader American campaign. That could threaten missile forces, command structures, economic networks, and maybe even regime stability. So Iran needed a response strong enough to be seen, but controlled enough to survive. That helps explain why several reports pointed to advance warning and why the strike caused no casualties. It helps explain why the number of missiles appears limited in verified reports. It helps explain why the attack could be framed by Iran as forceful and by the United States as weak at the same time. Both sides, in their own way, were trying to win the story without letting the military exchange spin out of control. That is the hidden pattern here. And once you see it, everything starts to make more sense. The viral script turns the event into a clean blockbuster. Massive strike, final command, darkness, recovery, punishment. It is exciting because it feels absolute. Someone won, someone lost. A machine broke, a giant answered. Reality is messier. Reality says states often attack while quietly helping the other side prepare. Reality says they sometimes stage retaliation in ways that preserve pride but reduce casualties. Reality says military power is not only about destruction. It is also about signaling, thresholds, channels, and the management of fear. That does not make the event small. It makes it more sophisticated and more dangerous in a different way. Because when countries learn they can strike and survive, they may start believing they can control escalation forever. That is when mistakes happen. That is when the gap between intention and outcome becomes deadly. Look at how the pieces fit together. Before the attack, AP reported that many transport planes, fighter jets, and drones had already been dispersed from Al Udeid's tarmac. That is a classic military precaution. You do not leave valuable aircraft lined up in one place when you think missiles may be coming. You spread them out, so one strike cannot do maximum damage. Source that tells you US planners were not asleep. They expected retaliation. They adjusted. They reduced the risk before the missiles ever launched. And that is a huge part of the story people miss. The real test of military strength is not just what happens during impact, it is what happens before impact. Did you anticipate the move? Did you harden the target? Did you disperse the assets? Did you protect personnel? Did you preserve command and communications? Did you deny the attacker the dramatic result he wanted? By that standard, the strike becomes a more interesting contest. Iran showed it could hit a symbolic and strategically important site. The United States and Qatar showed they could absorb that strike without losing lives or apparent base functionality. Iran showed resolve, Washington showed resilience, and both sides signaled they did not want the next step to be a war without breaks. If you're still with me, here's your mission. Drop a comment with one word only: signal, strike, or story. Then subscribe, because the wars people understand best are often the ones hidden inside the headlines. Now let's talk about the dome. That geodesic dome may sound like a minor detail, but it matters. AP reported that it housed equipment used for secure communications, and that photos taken after the strike showed the dome gone, with some damage visible on a nearby building while the rest of the base looked largely untouched. Source: in military terms, that means the strike was not completely empty theater. Something real was hit. Something useful was damaged. This was not just fireworks over the desert. Iran did put a mark on the base, but again, the difference between a useful system was damaged and America's war brain was shut down by 557 missiles is enormous. Those are not two versions of the same story. They are different worlds. And the reason people leap from one to the other is simple. Audiences love decisive images. A blown communications dome is visually strong, but a story about distributed command resilience is harder to turn into a thumbnail. A base staying operational after a limited strike is strategically meaningful, but final command before darkness is emotionally irresistible. That is why attention so often rewards exaggeration. But if your goal is to understand power, not just consume drama, you have to resist that pull. Ask the harder question. What did each side really achieve? Iran achieved visibility. It showed it could answer an American attack. It hit a base tied to US regional command. It demonstrated enough reach and confidence to make the world pay attention. Iranian officials and state media could present the strike as bold, punishing, and dignified. The United States achieved continuity. No casualties were reported. The base remained operational according to the Pentagon. Aircraft had been dispersed beforehand. The visible damage, while real, did not translate into a proven theater-wide command collapse in the reporting we have. Source: Qatar achieved something too, and people often overlook it. Qatar had to defend its territory, protect a major American base on its soil, and still avoid being swallowed by a regional firestorm. According to Axios, Qatar's foreign ministry strongly condemned the Iranian attack and called for a return to the negotiating table. The statement appeared quickly, suggesting preparation and urgency. Source: that matters because Qatar is not just scenery in this story, it is a state managing danger in real time. It hosts critical American military infrastructure, but it also lives in a region where every move is watched by neighbors, allies, and adversaries. For Qatar, the strike was not only about missiles, it was about sovereignty, diplomacy, and survival. And this is where the bigger lesson starts to emerge. Modern conflict is not always about destroying the opponent's capacity in one overwhelming blow. Often it is about creating an image of leverage. Can you prove reach? Can you shape fear? Can you show your public you answered? Can you send a message to your enemies without forcing them into the most extreme response? This is not less serious than old-style war. In some ways it is more unstable. Because both sides are gambling on precise emotional reactions. Too little, and you look weak. Too much, and you trigger disaster. Just enough, and you survive another round. But there is no perfect meter for just enough. One interception fails in the wrong place. One missile lands closer to barracks. One pilot dies. One radar operator misreads intent. One leader thinks the other side is bluffing, and suddenly the script changes. That is why this moment matters more than the online myth built around it. The myth is loud. The real lesson is fragile. And the fragile lesson is this: the region came close enough to feel the shape of a wider war, but not far enough to fall into it. That does not mean everyone was safe. It means the controls held this time. That phrase matters. Because every controlled exchange teaches future planners new things. Iran learns what kind of strike sends a message, and what defenses it can still touch. The United States learns what assets remain exposed, what can be moved sooner, and what communication nodes may need more protection or redundancy. Regional states learn how fast airspace closes, how quickly panic spreads, and how much warning is enough to preserve calm. So even if the event did not match the giant viral claim, it still produced intelligence for everyone involved. And that may shape the next crisis more than this one. There is another layer here that deserves attention. President Trump's public response mattered. Reuters reported that Iran's missile attack caused no injuries, and that Trump called for peace afterward. Reuters also reported that the attack threatened to widen the conflict, even as Trump dismissed it as weak. Source public language like that does two jobs at once. First, it lowers pressure for immediate escalation. If a president says the strike was devastating and unforgivable, the political space for restraint shrinks fast. If he says it was weak and no one was hurt, he leaves room to step away. Second, it frames the emotional memory of the event. People do not only remember what happened, they remember how leaders named what happened. That naming battle is crucial. Iran wants powerful retaliation. America wants limited, ineffective response. The internet wants 557 missiles in final command, and the truth sits between those frames, less cinematic, more strategic, and harder to sell. But if you are building a serious YouTube channel, that is exactly where your advantage lives. Not in shouting the most dramatic version, in taking viewers to the place where the real meaning is. And the real meaning is this: Udeid was important enough that even a restrained strike against it echoed across the world, but resilient enough that verified reporting did not support the fantasy of total operational blackout. That is the heart of the story. One more thing matters here. The base was not just protected by hardware, it was protected by expectation. Everyone knew retaliation was possible. That shared expectation changed behavior before the first missile flew. Aircraft moved, alerts rose, defenses prepared, diplomats watched. That is what deterrence and preemption look like in practice. Sometimes the most important defense is the one that changes the shape of the battlefield before the battle begins. And that leads to one uncomfortable conclusion. The strike may have been limited, partly because both sides understood each other too well. Iran knew how to respond without crossing the final line. The United States knew enough to prepare without pretending there was no risk. Qatar knew enough to react fast and contain fear. That kind of mutual understanding can preserve peace for a while. It can also lock rivals into a cycle where each exchange becomes more rehearsed, more normalized, and maybe more tempting. When violence becomes communication, communication can become addictive. That is the trap. And there is a human side to that trap that strategy papers rarely show you. Imagine being one of the people at that base when warnings start moving through the system. You may not know every political calculation above your head. You may not know how much advance notice was shared, or how carefully leaders are trying to control escalation. What you know is simpler. A hostile state has fired at the place where you work. Your body does not process that as calibrated signaling. Your body processes that as danger. That is why even limited strikes leave deep marks. Not only on buildings, but on memory. The public sees a map. Soldiers, aircrews, technicians, and families see minutes that could have gone another way. That is one reason these events matter, even when casualty counts stay at zero. Zero casualties is a blessing. It is not the same thing as zero consequence. And on the other side, leaders in Tehran also have to think about memory. They need domestic audiences to believe Iran answered. They need supporters to feel dignity restored. They need rivals to see capability. So the pressure to describe the strike in the biggest possible terms is not random. It is political oxygen. Once you understand that, the competing stories become easier to decode. One side sells resilience. The other sells retaliation. The audience online turns both into myth. So no, the verified story is not that Iran erased America's command center under a storm of 557 missiles. The verified story is more subtle and more useful. Iran retaliated against a critical U.S. base in Qatar after American strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Reports from AP and Axios describe a limited missile attack, advance warning, no casualties, and damage that included a communications dome. The Pentagon said Udeid remained fully operational. Source that may not sound as thrilling as the viral version. But it tells you far more about the real balance of fear in the Middle East. It tells you that a country can launch missiles and still be trying to avoid total war. It tells you that a base can be struck and still keep functioning. It tells you that symbolic damage can matter even when strategic collapse does not happen. It tells you that the line between deterrence and disaster is thinner than most people think. And maybe most importantly, it tells you to be careful whenever a war story arrives already polished like a movie. Real conflict is rarely that neat. It is full of noise, agendas, timing, omissions, staged strength, and selective truth. Every side edits. Every side performs. Every audience fills in the blanks with what it already fears. So the question is not only what happened. The deeper question is, who benefits from the version of events that spreads fastest? That question will save you from being manipulated more often than any single fact ever will. And before we land this, hit like if you want more reality-first war breakdowns, subscribe if you're tired of recycled panic, and share this video with someone who thinks the loudest headline is always the truest one. Because, in this case, the loudest headline was not the strongest fact. The strongest fact was endurance. A key American base was targeted. A real piece of secure communications infrastructure was damaged. No casualties were reported. The base stayed operational. And the region stepped back from a wider war by inches, not miles. That is not a small story. That is a serious story. It is a story about systems that bent without visibly breaking. It is a story about retaliation designed to be seen more than felt. It is a story about how the most powerful countries in the region measure force with a ruler so fine that one wrong inch could change history. And once you see that, the event becomes less like a mythic final command and more like something colder. A rehearsal with real missiles. A warning with real consequences. A glimpse of what a larger war might look like if the brakes fail next time. That may be the most unsettling part of all, because people hear no casualties and relax. They hear base still operational and assume nothing serious happened. They see that the world moved on and think the danger passed. But serious danger does not always announce itself with maximum destruction. Sometimes it announces itself by showing how close major powers can come to direct military exchange while still convincing themselves they are in control. That kind of confidence can calm a crisis. It can also build the next one. So when you hear the phrase America's war brain, remember this. Modern military power is not one room, one dome, one wire, or one dramatic final command. It is a network. It is preparation. It is redundancy. It is dispersal. It is command. Yes, but also adaptation. And the June 2025 strike on Al Udeid, based on the best verified reporting available, did not prove that network collapsed. If anything, it showed how much effort goes into making sure one strike does not become the whole war. That is the real takeaway. Not that the sky fell, but that both sides tested how much of the sky they could set on fire without burning the whole region down. And that is why this story matters. Not because it confirms the wildest claim, because it exposes the logic beneath the claim. A strike meant to answer, a defense meant to absorb. A narrative war fought on top of the real one, and a world that keeps mistaking the loudest version for the truest version. The next time a viral military story sounds too sharp, too perfect, too engineered to make your pulse jump, stop for 1 second and ask yourself a better question. What is the truth trying to compete with? Because sometimes that question tells you more than the missile count ever could.